Hello, everyone. This is Brian Crombie, the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I am pleased today to announce that I'm going to be a candidate for the mayor of Mississauga. I just think this is a change opportunity for Mississauga. It's an opportunity for us to really vote for and decide for the future of Mississauga. I think that there's been some real questions in the last couple of years about Mississauga, where it's going. And I think that we need some new leadership, some skills that haven't been present on council. And I think that we need some new ideas. And I'd like to take the next couple of minutes and talk to you a little bit about why I think I've got the skills, I've got the vision, and I've got some of the new ideas that I think we need to bring to City Council. I also think there's some big issues that we've got, some massive issues that we've got, and some crises, frankly, that we are in that we need to address. And I'm not sure if people that have been on council for whether it be a couple of years or for a couple of decades, whether they are the right people to address the crises that we have. And we've got to admit, those crises to ourselves, because the first thing one does when you got a problem is you got to admit that you got a problem. And I don't know if we've actually come to terms with admitting the problems that we've got. So let's talk about the one that is so evident, and that's an affordability and a housing crisis together. Because housing affordability, housing supply, I think, is the number one issue, but it's affordability writ large, not just from a housing standpoint. A lot of you may have seen this video of a guy that came from New York to his parents for Easter in Newmarket. And he was astounded at the costs. And he went through not just housing, but numerous different costs of living in Newmarket, not Mississauga, but Newmarket, and compared it to his life in New York and was shocked at how expensive it was. And it is outrageously expensive. We pay 2 times, maybe 3 times, based on some numbers, what a comparable person in the United States would pay, even in some of the major cities in the United States, for housing relative to our personal disposable income. And some politicians have blamed it on, Airbnb or foreign buyers or flipping or vacant tax. The reality is, and lots of studies have suggested this, that the biggest problem is lack of supply. And the lack of supply is caused by municipal government rules, regulations, red tape, the time it takes to get approvals. And yes, some people will blame that on NIMBYism, community groups that object. But the reality is, politicians are elected to decide what's right, and to educate and use your political capital to tell different groups when they're wrong, that they are wrong, and that we need to build additional housing. I think it is a generational tragedy that our generation, my generation, is going to leave a worse economic future for our kids than my parents' generation left us. And based on statistics, this is the first generation in history that is going to leave the next generation worse off. And it's primarily because of housing. That, I don't know about you, but my kids and a lot of people in Mississauga as kids don't have the wherewithal to afford the Mississauga dream of a single family home. Maybe they could get 500 or 600 square feet, but to have a home in Mississauga is unrealistic on the vast majority of people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s today. Unless you've got multiple generations living in a house, unless you've got the bank of mom and dad, unless you win a lottery. It is just unaffordable. It used to be that housing was 3 times income. Today, it's something like 20 times income. It's a tragedy, and it needs to be addressed. And so where do we start here? There's people that talk about, as of right to build 4 fourplexes on a single family lot. Most of the studies suggest, well, that's a good idea, or could be a good idea, that there is a fair amount of opposition to it, and that it's not going to make a big dent. And the reason why is it's really expensive to hire a contractor, get an architect, go through the process of building. Some people want to do it, whether it be a granny suite or a basement apartment or a full fourplex, but not everyone. And one-off kind of adjustments, I don't think does it. Other people have suggested that we need to have Paris-like developments throughout the city, which would be like 6 or 8 stories everywhere. I don't think people want 6 or 8 stories absolutely everywhere. I think that the way that it is organically developing in Vancouver, in Toronto, with major development and heights around transit nodes, is probably the right way. Such that I'm familiar with a development in Toronto where a couple of years ago, the city demanded that they have 2 or 3 parking spots per building. And now they're demanding having less than a parking spot per suite. And it's because we're orienting people to take transit, or some people to take transit. And that's the cheapest. And lots of studies have shown from an infrastructure standpoint, it is by far the cheapest way to make housing available. And if we can do it near transit, there is a little bit less opposition, usually from the neighborhoods. And the reason why is because they see the logical sense of it. And it justifies transit. And the transit is that they're going to get the benefit of. And it frankly makes stores and restaurants and some of the life that people want in the main streets more economically viable. And so I think that is the solution. Every architect I've talked to says that after about 10 stories, you don't see height. And so the easiest way to do it is to add a little bit of height, a little bit of density around transit zones. The province is talking about putting in a thing called major transit station area zoning. BC has already put something in where around a major transit station and or frankly a bus exchange, which is interesting in BC, you can't build unless you build at least 12 stories. So getting that density, getting that height around major transit zones, which would be GO train stations, TTC subway stations. And I frankly think that the BC example of where you've got major bus exchanges may make sense. And the logic of that is irrefutable. And you take a look at some of the developments that are occurring in Toronto. And I know Mississauga planners sometimes and Mississauga councillors sometimes don't want to look at Toronto and don't want to think about it as an example. But you take a look at what's being proposed at Cloverdale. Taking an old mall that's not being well used and putting 16 towers and building a city with great retail and potentially close to an extended GO train subway station makes a ton of sense. Bloor Dundas, Weston GO train station, the Golden Mile in Scarborough, Yonge and Steeles. I could go on. Why don't we do that in Mississauga? And we should be thinking about doing that. It's a serious opportunity. Logic areas for credit, Clarkson, and along the GO train that goes through Mississauga all the way to Milton. As you think about some of my suggestions in this regard, think about a couple of questions that I think we got to ask. Why is Mississauga not meeting the provincial housing targets that were laid out? Why did we not get about $25 million in provincial funding because we didn't meet those housing targets? Why did we have this very inspirational Downtown 21 plan that was put together and bragged about for a long period of time that we've come nowhere close to meeting? Why do we demand all the height and density be downtown Mississauga and not in other areas when other cities have said that is urban design that is a generation old and not the urban design of today? You know, in January, there was a big presentation in the Living Arts Centre that City Hall put on by a former chief city planner from the city of Vancouver that's now running a consultancy worldwide that came and talked about Mississauga in the next 50 years. He laid out a bunch of criticisms of Mississauga. Do you think City Council listened to those? Do they believe in those? Are they going to address those and make the changes that we need to have happen such that, number one, we meet our housing targets and increase supply, hopefully thereby bring housing affordability within the reach of the next generation of Mississaugans, our kids, and most importantly, create a city that's livable. Because right now I worry that Mississauga in too many areas is becoming just a place where the rich might be able to live. You know, we talk about the Manhattanization of Toronto. What about the Manhattanization of parts of Mississauga? Is that what we want? I don't think so. Mississauga was the place I moved to because it was a place where people could be proud to move to and live and raise a family, a middle-income family, and play soccer and hockey and go swimming and hiking and biking and enjoy some main streets, whether they be in Streetsville or Clarkson or Port Credit or Cooksville or wherever. I worry that our city council, because of rules, regulation, red tape, the time to get approvals, because of the lack of supply, the lack of approvals, has taken that opportunity away. And I think that is a crisis that needs to be addressed. We're going to take a break for some messages. I'm going to be back with crisis number 2 in just 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm excited to announce today my candidacy for Mayor of Mississauga. I've just talked for the last couple of minutes about housing affordability, which I think is the #1 issue of our city, of frankly, the greater Toronto area, greater metropolitan area, the GTA, maybe, frankly, a lot of Southern Ontario, the Lower Mainland in Vancouver, and maybe even Montreal. It's a crisis that needs to be dealt with. I think a connected issue is infrastructure. And this bridge that fell apart, that was damaged and fell down in Baltimore, is one of those examples where infrastructure isn't really exciting until it doesn't work. I want to try to make infrastructure exciting for you for the next couple of minutes, because I think that we haven't had that vision of how infrastructure can be exciting. The big move and the places to grow, analysis of about almost, frankly, a decade ago, came to the conclusion that the Mississauga-Milton GO train line, if it was made all-day, two-way frequent GO train service, has an 8-to-1 benefit to cost ratio. I spoke with a transit consultant from the UK that used to live in Toronto, that was one of the key people in an organization called the Neptus Foundation that did a critique of that. And he said, Brian, most transit proposals have a 2-to-3 benefit to cost ratios. Some have a 1-to-1 benefit to cost ratios, and then they still get built. 8-to-1 is astronomical. It's incredible. And there's a couple of reasons why. It goes on a diagonal, this line, through Mississauga, and so therefore its capture radius is substantial. And that a lot of Mississauga people have jobs or want jobs in Toronto. And so the direction of it is very positive. And the one negative to it being really successful is the fact that there's only a certain amount of trains inbound to the city in the morning and outbound in the evening. And if you get invited to a hockey game, if you're worried that you're going to have to stay late at work, if you want to go down midday, there's no trains. There's a concept in transportation called the S-curve. As you see the frequency of trains go up, initially the ridership doesn't go up a lot, but as the frequency goes so high that you don't need to look at a schedule to go to the train station. There's going to be a train coming sometime soon. The usage of it accelerates dramatically in almost an exponential kind of a fashion, and then after a while it levels out. You can't get better service. We do not have that in the Mississauga-Milton line. We've been talking about all-day two-way GO on the Milton-Mississauga line for like 20 years, and it hasn't happened. Dangerous goods, freight traveling through Lake Megantic, traveling through Calgary. Politicians got up in arms, public got up in arms, and demanded something be done. We have those goods coming straight through Mississauga and through Toronto, through the annex, as we know. And people say, when are you going to have a derailment? Remember 1978? We had a huge derailment, right? At Mavis Road. There are solutions on we can take those goods off of that road, off of that railway, which frees up that railway for passenger service. Why do you think we've got the Lakeshore Line? It's not because we built the Lakeshore Line. It's because we moved all of the CN freight traffic off of the Lakeshore Line up to north of Highway 7 and 407. Well, why don't we do it again? Move the CP freight traffic off of this line and north of the city, where, frankly, it should be, rather than going right through Mississauga, right through the annex, right by the Summerhill, LCBO, and Rosedale, Forest Hill, etc. It doesn't make sense. And if you don't do that, then at least build those extra tracks such that we can have all-day two-way frequent GO train service on the Milton-Mississauga line. And if we did that, it would be effectively a subway for Mississauga. And it would really become a subway if a couple of extra things happened. I think an extra stop at Cawthra, where the railway crosses Dundas right at Cawthra, makes a ton of sense and would build up that area and would once again give you 3 stops that are right along Dundas, maybe even 4: Mavis, Cooksville, Cawthra, and Dixie. It would be like a subway along Dundas. It would save us a lot of the expense of potentially putting an LRT or BRT along Dundas if we actually did something as aggressive like that. There was a proposal at one point in time, about 30, 40 years ago, to extend the Bloor subway into Mississauga. The subway, the TTC subway is going into Vaughan right now. And it's been the catalyst for the Vaughan Metro Center, which is, I think, spectacular. Great development, great retail, great restaurants if you've been up there, and now going to have a comparable living arts center. So it's becoming a cultural hub. The TTC on Yonge Street is going to be extended to Richmond Hill, and Yonge and Steeles, Yonge north of 407 and Highway 7 are slated to grow fairly dramatically, and I think in an excellent development pattern. Why shouldn't the subway come into Mississauga? There are environmental studies that have already been done, taking it as far as Sherway. For one more stop past Kipling to the East Mall, another stop at Sherway, it would only be one more stop and it would get to Dixie and Dundas. I think if the subway went to Dixie and Dundas, you had a GO train that was all-day two-way frequent at Dundas, Dixie and Dundas would be as attractive, if not more attractive, frankly, than the Vaughan Metro Center, than Yonge and Steeles, than Yonge and Highway 7, than Weston GO train station. If you think about a nexus for development, it's an area that's primarily retail, commercial today. There aren't a lot of residents. It's got two highways, the QEW, the 427. It would have a GO train that would get you downtown in about 20 minutes with only two stops, Kipling and then Union Station. Frankly, it should have three. It should add a stop at Dundas West and a subway. I think that makes a ton of sense. I think that would create a subway along Dundas for Mississauga above ground if we only did it all day, two-way frequent service. I'll give you another one. I think that the Brightwater developments and the Lakeview developments that are happening in South Mississauga are really quite exciting. But they're going to bring traffic and congestion to South Mississauga that's going to be a complete disaster. I shudder to think about what Mississauga Road, Huron, Ontario, Cawthra, Dixie, Browns Line are going to be like. Lakeshore is going to be like. And it's going to spill out. As you know, whenever you get that kind of congestion, people go on Stavebank and Ogden and other roads to try to get to the highways. I think South Mississauga with 10 to 15,000 people at Brightwater, and I'm hearing 25 to maybe 50,000 at Lakeview of extra people with no improvements in roads or transit, other than LRT that doesn't go far enough. I'll give you two ideas in that regard that I think are infrastructure ideas that make a ton of sense and could radically improve and change the situation. There is a rail line that goes from the Lakeshore line right into the Lakeview area. It's where they had a railway that would take coal to the coal plants. And the right-of-way still exists and the rail line still exists, going from Lakeview across Lakeshore all the way up to the Lakeshore line and then merges in with the Lakeshore line and continues to Long Branch. Go. And then amazingly, Metrolinx already owns another rail line that goes off of that line up to Kipling, up to the Kipling GO and the Kipling subway. What if you had a GO train service that went from Lakeview, right on the lake, up to Long Branch, and then up to Kipling GO, Kipling subway? All of a sudden, Lakeview would turn from a place that I think is going to be a disaster from transit into one of the best transit places because it could access easily the Lakeshore line and the subway and the Milton Mississauga line. It would go from lousy transit to incredible transit. And then I'm not suggesting this, but just to think for a second, right on the other side of the street in Kipling is a hydro right-of-way that goes all the way from Kipling to the airport. Or like the JFK SkyTrain, you could take it elevated up the middle of the 427. I'm not sure if either of those make sense, but the Red Rocket that goes from Kipling to the airport is one of the best utilized bus routes. If Lakeview could get to Kipling, to Long Branch and then Kipling, and then maybe even to the airport, or no, take the train and take it all the way to Kipling and then back on that line to Dundas West and then down to Union. It would turn Lakeview from an area that I'm worried is going to create a traffic disaster to a place that would be best transit in the whole city. Brightwater. Why did we take the LRT all the way to Port Credit and terminate it at the Port Credit GO when we're building a town on 75 acres? And to put it in perspective, 75 acres is the size of Rome or Barcelona. Major European cities are on the same kind of area as Brightwater is at Mississauga Road and Lakeshore. I drove through it the other weekend. It's massive. And people are talking about 10 to maybe 15,000 people there. Why doesn't the Hurontario LRT go into Lakeview? And there's two logical ways that you could get there. One would be across the rail lines, across the Credit River and down south, maybe through where that Loblaws shopping center is into the center of Lakeview. Or even better, I would think would be to go down one of those streets in Port Credit to One Port Street, because I've got some great ideas for One Port Street as well, which is that huge warehouse that goes out into the water, then cross the Credit River. And if it crossed the Credit River south of Lakeshore, a transit-like bridge crossing along with a bike pedestrian crossing would, I think, make the mouth of the Credit River as spectacular as that beautiful bridge that's across the Humber River in Toronto. And then that could continue along into Lakeview. If you had that transit such that people could hop on an LRT in Brightwater and in less than a couple of minutes be at the GO train station in Port Credit to get on the Lakeshore line, or in a couple more minutes, take it up to Cooksville to get on the Cooksville GO, or to go to Square One, or all the way up to Brampton if that's what they desire. Brightwater could turn from a place that I think is going to be a disaster on Mississauga Road, Lakeshore, and Hurontario into an incredibly well-served transit area. Why aren't we thinking about these ideas? Why aren't we planning these ideas? Why aren't we demanding these kinds of infrastructure improvements? And I think we should. So I think there's some infrastructure that really needs to be addressed and talked about. And I got some ideas about the soul of the city that I think we're also missing, that I want to talk about in just a minute. Stay with us. I'll be back in 2 minutes with some ideas that I think are a little bit exciting about what builds the heart, the soul of a city. Infrastructure and housing are critically important, but you also need to have a soul, which is parks and culture and arts. Stay with me. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Tonight is my show where I'm announcing my candidacy for mayor of Mississauga. You know, today is a new month. It is Easter Monday. It's spring. It's, for many people, Easter, which is all about rebirth, regeneration, etc. And I think that it's a great time to think about change. I think the Toronto election really was a change election. And people got a lot of opportunities to think about the Toronto that they wanted. And I think we need that in Mississauga. And having just old councillors, former councillors, or current councillors actually, running, I'm not sure is the right idea. You got to bring in some people from the outside to really challenge those councillors to think about the Mississauga that they want in the future. And so let me ask you a couple of questions about the soul of the city, about the vision of the city. There was an announcement last week, just as a comparison, of a complete redevelopment of what used to be called the O'Keefe Center and the St. Lawrence Center into just an unbelievable arts and culture center in Toronto, such that they called it the Lincoln Center of Toronto, or the Place des Arts of Toronto. Do we have that in Mississauga? There's been proposals to upgrade the Living Arts Center, to put a hotel on it, to put a convention center on it, to expand it. You know, Hazen McCallion, the former mayor, had a lot of guts, had a lot of vision to bring the community together to build that Living Arts Center, which is a gorgeous facility. But what else have we done to add to it, to strengthen it, to make it more vibrant, to join it in with the city? I don't know if we've done a lot. As I mentioned, this Mississauga Downtown 2021 was really quite exciting. When I saw it back in the early 2000s, I got really quite excited about it. It was going to build a downtown street in that area. Hasn't happened. I've got a couple of other complaints about what we should be and could be thinking about doing. Riverwood, which is contiguous park from Arundel Conservation Area at Dundas, Riverwood at Burnhamthorpe, up to the Pincham Farms north of Riverwood, going up to Eglinton, is 551 acres of parkland, contiguous parkland. Stanley Park is 1,000 acres. Central Park is 800 acres. Every other major urban park in the world that I've been able to find, at least, are less than the size of Riverwood. I got to ask you, does Riverwood have any kind of the impact, when you think about Mississauga, that Stanley Park does for Vancouver, or Central Park does for Manhattan, or Hyde Park does for London, or the Bois de Boulogne has for Paris. I could go on and on. Hyde Park for Toronto, but it could and should. And instead, what we do is we brag that it's a hidden gem, and it shouldn't be. We could do some things in Riverwood, in Arundel Conservation Area, planning it together, organize it together, pathways around it, and things inside of it that attract people to it, that make it so spectacular that it's the place that you got to go to when you visit Mississauga, just like you got to go to Stanley Park, and you got to go to Central Park, and you got to go to Hyde Park. And I don't know why we're not doing it. We've got an asset on the waterfront that I think is spectacular. One Port Street is a huge warehouse built in the 1950s when lake freighters around Lake Ontario and the Great Lakes were a big thing. It's massive. It's gorgeous inside. It's got these huge garage doors that open up onto the water. It's owned by the federal government. If it was in Vancouver, we'd build the Granville Island Market, Farmers Market, and Arts and Cultural District. If it was downtown Toronto, we'd build the St. Lawrence Market. If it was in San Francisco, we'd call it Fisherman's Wharf. If it was in Seattle, we'd call it, what is it? I can't remember now, the Fifth Wharf or something like that. If it was in New York, it'd be South Street Seaport. If it was in Disney, it'd be Pleasure Island. But you know what we're going to do? We're going to tear it down. We're going to build 10 condos. Why? Because we don't have someone demanding that this incredible facility that's right there south of downtown Port Credit should be the biggest, most wonderful retail entertainment, farmers market, arts and culture establishment in all of Mississauga, at least on the waterfront of Mississauga. And if it had that LRT station right in front of it that I was mentioning earlier, if the LRT continued down to Port Street and then across to Lakeview, it would have incredible transit. And it's got this massive parking lot that you could have concerts on. You can have the place to go for fireworks. It would be just a wonderful place. And if you had a bridge from Lakeview across the Credit River to that One Port Street, and then the One Port Street continued along, it would be the nexus of the best waterfront trail you've ever seen. When waterfront trails are surveyed, whether they be Ambleside in West Vancouver or the South Street Steeport, or example after example, people want nature, they want water, they want fresh air, but they also want some culture, they want some retail shopping, and that would be the best possible connection to it. In downtown North Vancouver, they had a similar wharf, Lonsdale Quay, and they built a hotel and some condos on top of it and around it, so that you don't have to give up all development opportunities if the federal government demands some development opportunities, but to keep that center, like Queens Quay, downtown Toronto, I think would be a spectacular opportunity for Mississauga. The Britannia Farms. The Britannia Farms are on Huron, Ontario, by Bristol. It's something, 100, 200 acres, I think it is. And they're talking about potentially developing 30 on Huron, Ontario. It is bigger than Black Creek Pioneer Village. It's bigger than the Riverdale Farm. It's gorgeous. It's got a sugar bush. It's got agriculture. It used to be a working farm right in the center of Mississauga. Think of it, all these people that come from around the world to reside in Mississauga, we could educate them with a Riverdale Zoo, a Black Creek Pioneer, a Britannia Farms. And it was actually given to the province of Ontario, to the educational system, to educate people. Why don't we educate people about how rich our agricultural heritage is in southwestern, in Ontario, in Mississauga? It's a farmland that's owned by the public purse. I think that we've got arts and culture opportunities that in Mississauga that have gone, we haven't exploited them. I take a look at the Port Credit Legion. It's a gorgeous building and a great location. In Oakville, they would have turned it into the Oakville Center for the Performing Arts, and maybe, joint ventured with the Legion to help justify it. Clark Hall is a gorgeous facility. I've heard from, performers that they started out in the Masonic Hall in Streetsville, and yet it's gone to disrepair. We've got arts and culture facilities around the city that we should be thinking about making the soul of the city, making the heart of the city, making those things that give our city life. So I've talked about a housing affordability crisis. I've talked about an infrastructure crisis, and I've talked about some transit changes, and I've talked about a soul of the city. I'm going to take a break and come back, and I want to talk about governance because I think that's an area of issue as well. Stay with me, I hope. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm very excited today to announce my candidacy for Mayor of Mississauga. I think it is an incredible opportunity for Mississaugans to give the next 2 months some thought about the city that we want in the future. And I do think that we've had this sort of, I don't know what it's been, distraction with separation. And, you know, it has some political appeal, just like Quebec separation had some political appeal, just like Brexit had some political appeal, just like, frankly, the separation of Detroit into, you know, the downtown versus the suburbs had some political appeal. But I think it's fundamentally a mistake. We are a Greater Toronto Area, and we're component parts of the Greater Toronto Area. I'm proud to be a resident of Mississauga. I've been a resident of Mississauga for 24 years. I was chairman of the Mississauga Summit. I was requested at the request of Hazel McCallion, the former mayor. I was chairman of the Western GTA Summit. I was president of the Mississauga Arts Council. I've been a coach for soccer teams in this city. I have lived and worked in this city for 24 years. I know it and I love it. I back in a park. I play tennis. I run. I walk my dog. I love this neighborhood. I love going to Port Credit. I love going to Streetsville. I go to Cooksville almost every Saturday morning for breakfast. I love this city. I go for walks down on the waterfront. But we're part of the Greater Toronto Area. And separation into a whole bunch of different pieces, I just don't think makes sense. Back in 1996, there was a task force that was structured that said we need more coordination, more collaboration, less separation. And the only recommendation that was accepted out of that was the amalgamation of Toronto. And I think that was potentially a mistake. During COVID, there were mayors and chairs of 29 different cities and regions that got together to think about, you know, collaborating together. It doesn't happen on a regular basis and maybe should. And I'm not saying we should amalgamate. I'm not saying that. But I do think we should be thinking about better ways to structure this city that is now the 4th largest metropolitan region in all of North America. Think of that. Mexico City, New York City, Los Angeles, and then Toronto. We're bigger than Greater Chicago, bigger than Greater Dallas, greater than all those other cities in the United States, stretching from Oshawa to Niagara or Waterloo, contiguous metropolitan area. And we need to think about the vision for this area. And I don't think we are. And I think we need to. And so I think that from a governance standpoint, we should be looking at, are there opportunities for us to work more closely with our neighbors rather than separate from our neighbors? And I'm not saying that amalgamation is what we should be doing. I'm not. But I think some sort of more closer working relationship makes sense. I think if the United Way merges, if the hospitals merge, if boards of trade merge, if businesses merge, and they all find efficiencies through that, and because of that we could have lower taxes, I think it's worth at least thinking about. We also have a democratic deficit, I believe. There are 3 wards that are twice the size of 2 wards. That doesn't make sense. Residents in Ward 1 and Ward 2 don't deserve twice as much voting power as residents in other wards. In provincial and federal politics, you got to equalize the riding boundaries over time so that there is some difference, but it's not an outrageous difference. Should not be such an outrageous difference in Mississauga. Mike Harris, back, when was that, 30 years ago, actually talked about referendum in Mississauga. And I think that, or in municipalities, I think that that's potentially a brilliant idea, because one of the things that I think happens is that local communities can have a lot of influence. And I don't think that that influence should be taken away. We need to listen to the local people when they oppose a local development or whether they got better ideas. So I am not one of those people that think that any kind of community involvement is NIMBY and shouldn't be listened to and heard. But I do think that the YIMBYs, which is the yes in my backyard, or the whole city attitude, needs to be heard, and there's not a vehicle for hearing the whole city's point of view. I spoke with Joe Barrage of Transit of Urban Strategies one point in time, and he says, Brian, if everyone was elected citywide, everyone's attitudes would change, because the problem is these ward councillors only do what the people right there next to them want them to do. But if they actually thought about voting in the interest of the whole city, the way the mayor has to, they would change their attitudes. And I think if we had referendum municipally, I think people's attitudes would change. And then I think the final thing we got to address and we got to admit is that we've got a crime and safety, a public safety issue. Crime in my neighborhood, and I think across Mississauga and frankly in the Balance Appeal, is up dramatically with car theft and home invasions and burglaries. And I just don't know why. And I don't think immigration is the reason. And I don't think inflation and economic times is the reason. I worry that it's our social fabric and community policing that may have not fallen by the wayside, but not been as present as they should be. So those are the things I wanted to talk about. I've got, I think, great corporate experience. I've, 30 years ago, I worked on developing master plan communities for the Walt Disney Company. 10 years ago, I was developing master plan community in downtown Ottawa. Didn't go ahead, but was great planning. Today, I'm working for a real estate development company that's developing beautiful facilities right across North America. I've been, as I mentioned, chair of the Mississauga City Summit at the request of Hazel McCallion. I've been president of the Mississauga Arts Council. I'm doing a doctorate. I'm not finished, but I'm trying to do a doctorate in business where I'm talking about economic development in economic clusters. I've got, I believe, the corporate background, the volunteer background, the skills, the educational background and knowledge, and the leadership skills. And on this radio show, I've got over 1,500 shows. I've talked to a ton of really interesting people that I've been able to chat with about what they think about their community, about their country, about Mississauga, about development, about housing, about inflation, about climate change, about a lot of issues. And I've learned from that. And that is, I think, to my benefit and also to yours if you're so kind as to consider me as a candidate. So housing affordability, infrastructure, transit, governance issues, public safety, and most importantly, a vision for Mississauga in the future as part of a beautiful Greater Toronto area. So everyone, please consider voting for me. April Fools. Good night.